What's wrong? Nothing. My son, Andrew, entered the house without looking at me, his head hanging low. It's fine. I'm not going to work anymore. What do you mean? Explain yourself. He clearly didn't want to talk to us and tried to ignore me as he stepped inside. But I was shocked when I saw Andrew's back. It was because something had been stuck to Andrew's back. It was a piece of paper with the words "No junior high graduate allowed" written on it. This was probably Daniel's doing. He must have slapped it on Andrew when he turned him away. My father, Kevin, who had stormed into the company, got straight to the point as soon as he settled into his seat. Canceled the entire $20 million deal. At the time, I wasn't fully aware, but that single statement would become the trigger that cornered Daniel. My name is Ryan. I am a man in my 40s, working as an employee at a company. I assist my father, Kevin, who is the president of the company. My father, who is in his 60s, has a strict personality and holds high standards for everything. Because he never compromises at work, every day can be tough. However, this also makes the work rewarding, so I would say I feel fulfilled every day. I have a son, Andrew. Since he was young, his dream was to work at a model-making company. He took a pre-employment assessment for a major company located far away and successfully passed. Starting this spring, he will begin working at that company. As a father, I was overjoyed that his dream was about to come true. When Andrew got the job offer, I felt as though I were the one being congratulated. Andrew has loved assembling models since he was a child, so I truly think it's wonderful. Surely, he would experience the same sense of purpose that I have in my own work. Honestly, I considered getting a job at an ordinary company since this one's pretty famous. But I didn't want to live with regrets in my one and only life. It's your life, so you should live it however you want. You've loved building models since you were a kid. I'm glad you passed the interview. Congratulations. That's right. Don't hold back or give up on anything. Life is short, and before you know it, you'll be an old man if you just sit around. When Andrew hesitated just a little, my wife Samantha and I said these words to encourage him. Even my father, though often strict, was kind to his grandson. Smiling, he said, "Do your best." Andrew's department had already been decided, and he had finished greeting his new workplace. He mentioned that the next step would be attending the entrance ceremony. Normally, this would have been such a happy occasion. But I was slightly worried because the manager in his assigned department, Daniel, seemed to dislike Andrew. Andrew has a stronger sense of responsibility than most people, and when problems arise, he tends to carry the burden alone because he doesn't want to trouble others. Although Daniel wouldn't attend the entrance ceremony, there was a chance Andrew might run into him somewhere. I just hoped nothing bad would happen to him. A few days later, Andrew woke up to the long-awaited morning of his company entrance ceremony. Although he had been slightly nervous and had trouble sleeping the night before, he didn't look sleep-deprived. Waking up to the sound of sparrows, I made my way from my room to the living room. As I entered, I heard Andrew and Samantha talking, both of them still sounding sleepy. Did you get enough sleep? You seem a little out of it. You need to wake up properly, you know. I'm fine. It takes about an hour on the bullet train to get to the company, so I'll wake up by then. When I walked into the room and greeted them, Andrew was already sitting at the table, clearly fresh out of bed. Good morning. Oh, good morning. You're up quite early today. Well, today's Andrew's big day, his entrance ceremony. I couldn't sleep because I was nervous for him. It wasn't even my own event, but knowing it was such a turning point in his life left me restless. Incidentally, my father, who lives with us, is an extremely early riser. By the time the rest of us wake up, he's already out of the house. As the company president, I suppose he has many responsibilities to handle. While I was lost in thought, Samantha, who had been preparing breakfast, brought over a plate. On it were 2 slices of bread, a fried egg, and some bacon, which were meant for me. I turned it into a sandwich and started eating. Andrew, are you all set? You didn't forget anything, did you? And you'll introduce yourself properly to the other employees, right? Of course I will. I've been preparing for this day for a while now. Didn't I have you and Mom help me practice for interviews over and over? You even checked my things for me. That's right. Haha, you were so eager yesterday. Yeah, you were like a little kid. I teased him, and Andrew, looking a bit miffed, fired back with a quick retort. That morning, the three of us sat around the table, chatting happily without any idea of what was to come. Once breakfast ended, Samantha joined us at the table, and we started watching TV together. Just then, the news that had been playing earlier was interrupted, and a quiz segment began. It seemed to be about dining etiquette and trivia. The questions were familiar to me, so I answered them with ease. That's called a finger bowl. It's used to clean your fingers. I didn't know such a thing existed. And by the way, with utensils like knives and forks, you're supposed to use the ones placed on the outside first. Samantha looked impressed, and Andrew seemed surprised, which I found oddly satisfying. What was being broadcast on TV seemed like knowledge that had no relevance to an ordinary family like ours. However, because I often encountered such things through my work, I ended up learning them thoroughly. After a few more questions, the quiz ended, and another segment began. Taking the opportunity, I turned to Andrew and asked something that had been on my mind. By the way, you visited the company the other day to introduce yourself, right? How was it? It was fine. The atmosphere was nice, and everyone treated me kindly, so there's no problem at all. That's good, but if anything happens like trouble or someone bothering you, you need to talk to us about it, okay? I know. There's nothing to worry about. The last time we talked, he seemed a bit uneasy about his manager, but perhaps it had been resolved. I wanted to ask more questions, but I knew better than to interfere too much. Even though he's my son, he's also a fully grown adult. As a parent, the best thing I could do was offer my help only when he needed it. Still, thinking about his childhood often made me overly protective. This tendency of mine stemmed from an incident during his final year of junior high school. About a month before graduation, Andrew had been in an accident. While walking across the street, a car that ran a red light hit him. Because of that, he missed his graduation ceremony and didn't go on to high school. I regret not being able to attend the graduation ceremony, but it's all about how you look at things. Since I couldn't go to high school, I can just start working earlier than everyone else. Andrew, who said that, seemed to have decided to start working after recovering, thinking it might as well be the best course of action. And so, Andrew stepped out into the world. Afterward, until he turned 20, he worked part-time at factories, but to be honest, I had hoped he would attend high school properly. Even if he couldn't attend a regular high school, there were other options if we had explained the circumstances. Because of that incident, I couldn't help but worry about him. A person's worth isn't determined by their education, but there are people in the world who judge others based on it. I just hope Andrew wouldn't be hurt by those kinds of people. A few minutes later, Andrew left the house, but as I glanced at the entryway, I let out a small sigh. That kid, after all those reminders, he still forgot something. It seemed he had left his watch by the entrance. So, I hurriedly ran out to chase after him. Andrew was taking the bullet train to commute to his workplace. If he boarded it, I wouldn't be able to catch up, so I had to hurry. Luckily, an empty taxi passed by, and I took it to the station. There, I searched for Andrew. However, during the busy morning hours, finding one person in the crowd was a challenge. I walked around for several minutes, but it felt like I wouldn't find him. Just as I was about to give up, I miraculously spotted him. It appeared he was helping a woman in a wheelchair. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done if you were late for work because of me. It's fine. There's still plenty of time. Near the elevator, I saw Andrew cheerfully conversing with the woman as he helped her. Seeing that, I felt relieved and was about to say something. However, before I could, Andrew spoke to someone. It turned out to be a male supervisor from work. Daniel? What a coincidence. I didn't know we lived in the same area. His name was Daniel. He is in the same generation as me, in his 40s. It seemed that, like Andrew, he also commuted a long distance, as he was walking toward the bullet train station. I had already heard a bit about Daniel from Andrew. Good morning. My name is Andrew, and I'll be working with you starting today. It's a pleasure to meet you. Although Andrew had introduced himself at the workplace a few days ago, he probably felt it was polite to formally greet him again. Andrew bowed respectfully toward Daniel. However, Daniel didn't respond. Whether he didn't hear him or chose to ignore him, he just walked on. Andrew, flustered, hurriedly followed him, trying to repeat his greeting. Excuse me. But before Andrew could finish, Daniel cut him off with an irritated voice. Shut up. I heard you just fine. Can't you tell I'm ignoring you on purpose? Huh? I froze in place, shocked by Daniel's unexpected words. He stopped walking and glared fiercely at Andrew. I heard you're a junior high school graduate. Don't talk to me like we're equals. Know your place. What? I was just trying to introduce myself. Andrew had done nothing wrong. And yet, his educational background seemed to be enough for Daniel to harbor such intense hatred. Andrew had been thinking about happily working at his dream job until this morning, but for something like this to happen, it's just too cruel. To be treated with such hostility by his manager on his first day. You shouldn't even be joining the company. Scum like you doesn't belong here. I strongly opposed your hiring. But HR clearly doesn't know what they're doing. Andrew seemed to be racking his brain, searching for words to defend himself or prove his worth. He opened and closed his mouth several times, but nothing came out. Don't think you can find an ally here. If you join the company, I'll make sure you and your family regret it. My parents are well connected in this area, you know. It'd be easy to spread rumors. I later heard that Daniel's parents were both school teachers and had a wide network of acquaintances in the local community. Having mentored countless students and built relationships with influential figures in their careers, they had a certain standing in society. If Daniel's family were to maliciously spread rumors, there was no doubt it would reach a lot of people. In reality, his parents were not that kind of people, but neither I nor Andrew knew that at the time. So, both of us were completely rattled. I just wanted to get along. In front of me, Andrew hung his head, his voice trembling with tears. It wasn't that Andrew had a weak mentality compared to others. But hearing his family brought into the situation must have left him deeply shaken. Even Mr. Foster, the company president, would be troubled by a junior high school graduate like you. Sure. He might act welcoming for appearance's sake, given his position. After all, he can't write no low education applicants allowed on a job listing. Can he? Daniel's words referenced Mr. Foster, the president of the company where Andrew was about to work. Mr. Foster was a man who firmly believed everyone deserved a second chance and had created opportunities for people to restart their lives. In fact, I knew him well. He was never the type of person to judge others based on their academic background, but my true feelings couldn't reach Daniel, who was far away. All I could do was watch, and in my line of sight, Andrew was trembling, perhaps overwhelmed by the shock. I wanted nothing more than to rush over and encourage him, but I knew it wasn't my place as a parent to interfere unnecessarily. Clenching my fists tightly, I continued to watch. Eventually, Andrew pulled himself together, looked Daniel straight in the eyes, and began to speak. You don't have to like me. Just let me work here. I'll do everything I'm told, and I won't be a burden. He kept speaking, asking Daniel not to reject him simply because of his educational background. With unwavering eyes, he bowed repeatedly, his voice filled with earnest determination. However, Daniel remained unmoved. "Is that all you have to say?" Daniel, as he said that, wore a look as if he were staring at something utterly worthless. With an expression full of disdain, Daniel grabbed Andrew's shoulder. It wasn't an action to encourage him or to accept someone with a lower academic background. It was a gesture to reject Andrew as a person. "Just the sight of you makes me sick. I can't bear the thought of having you in the same department." Saying this, he spun Andrew around to face the station's exit. Seeing this, I quickly turned and decided to head home. Andrew will probably go home. So when he comes back, I need to be the first to greet him and offer him some reassuring words. As I hurried away, I heard Daniel's cold, cutting voice behind me. "Stop wasting my time, you junior high school graduate. Go home and find some other job." I couldn't even begin to imagine how Andrew must have felt at that moment. What expression did he wear as he walked away? I wanted to know, but I couldn't interfere. He had his pride, and I knew he wouldn't want me to see him in such a humiliating situation. So, all I could do was walk back home. Clenching my fists in frustration, I started to think about what I needed to do next. If Andrew came home and chose to talk to me about it, I had to be ready to do everything in my power to help him. As a father, I was determined to give him all the support I could. After about 20 minutes, I returned home and explained everything to Samantha as we waited for Andrew. "What's with that scary look on your face? Did you give him his watch?" "Well, a lot happened." Samantha, holding the tailored clothes Andrew was supposed to wear for the company's formal events, was speechless after hearing my explanation. Her shock quickly turned to anger. Even Samantha, who was usually so calm, couldn't hide her frustration. "That's just awful. Andrew must be so hurt." "Yeah. I want to help him if I can, but it's up to him to decide what to do next." As we were having this conversation, Andrew returned home. I quickly grabbed my work bag, pretending I was just about to leave for work. In my haste, I forgot to hide the formal clothes I had left out for a party, but thankfully, Andrew didn't seem to notice. He avoided making eye contact with us. "Andrew? I thought you already left for work." I will act as if I know nothing and call out to Andrew. But Andrew didn't respond. He simply stood there, silent and unmoving. Samantha, trying to help, stepped in next. "Did you forget something? You'll be late if you don't hurry back and grab it." "It's not that." "It's not." Finally, Andrew spoke, his voice cracking as he looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. I called out to Andrew, silently pleading, "Please, just talk to me." "What happened?" "Nothing." Andrew hung his head low and walked further into the house. "It's over. I'm not going to the company anymore." "What do you mean?" "Explain it to us." He probably wanted to avoid talking to us and was trying to ignore us as he went into the house. However, I was startled when I saw Andrew's back. On Andrew's back, there was something stuck. It was a piece of paper with the words "No junior high graduate allowed" written on it. It had to be Daniel's doing. He must have stuck it on Andrew's back when he sent him away. I pulled the paper off and held it in my hand, praying that Andrew would open up to us. "Can't you tell us what's going on? Are we so unreliable that you can't come to us?" Hearing those words, Andrew finally broke down, tears spilling over as he looked at me. It seemed my words had reached him, as Andrew began to speak from there, telling us everything. I held Andrew tightly as he cried, comforting him. In life, there are things we can't face alone. And it's never wrong to lean on someone when we need help. I made sure to tell Andrew this. A few minutes later, as soon as I finished listening to Andrew, I called my father. Though he was already at the company, he promised without hesitation to help his grandson. I couldn't stand idly by either. After giving Andrew the watch he'd forgotten, we quickly left the house and headed to his company. But Andrew, ever thoughtful, felt guilty about dragging me and his grandfather into the situation. As soon as we sat down on the bullet train, he began to apologize. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm such a mess, even at this age. I can't even handle my own problems." "Don't say that. You've grown into a kind, considerate son who cares about his family. I could never blame you for this. Besides, this time, the other side is the one being unfair. There's no shame in accepting my help." As I said this, I reached over and patted his head, trying to comfort him. I thought back to the time Andrew was lying in that hospital bed after his accident, apologizing for what had happened. Even though he's an adult now, he's still my child, the one I will always protect. After about an hour, we arrived at Andrew's company. At the reception desk, I introduced myself, and they immediately escorted us to a meeting room. There, we reunited with my father, and 3 generations of our family sat together, waiting. It was strange to think that we'd all be gathered here under these circumstances. "Why did they respond so quickly when you gave your name? Dad, Grandpa, are you hiding something from me?" Andrew looked surprised, clearly taken aback by how promptly we were accommodated. In the meantime, the office became increasingly chaotic, and a man appeared. Approaching us nervously, visibly sweating, was Mr. Foster, the president we had worked with many times before. Once my father had settled himself into his seat, he immediately cut to the chase. "Canceled the entire $20 million deal." That one sentence was enough to corner Daniel. Whether the deal would actually be canceled or not was beside the point. My father said it to ensure Mr. Foster understood the gravity of the situation. At that moment, however, Andrew, who was with us, had no idea what was going on and looked utterly confused. He stared at me intently, as if demanding an explanation. I couldn't exactly leave him in the dark, so I leaned over and explained the situation in a low voice. "Actually, our company has a business relationship with this one. I see Mr. Foster quite often." "Really? You never told me that." "Sorry, but it couldn't be helped. Confidentiality obligations and all that." Andrew had been working for several years, albeit for a short time, out in the world. I heard that his work mainly involved physical labor in factories, so he didn't have many opportunities to handle confidential information. Still, he should have understood. He should know that sharing information obtained through work carelessly with others is unacceptable. Given how unexpected this must have been for him, though, his reaction was understandable. After all, neither my father nor I ever discussed work at home. On weekends, I usually spent my time watching TV or chatting casually with Samantha. My father, too, often spends his time tending to the garden or enjoying a game of chess with the elderly members of the community. It was no wonder Andrew had no idea. At the company, I assist my father, who's the president. I often accompany him to meetings with other executives. So it's not unusual for me to know other company presidents. Exactly. As a president, it's crucial to maintain strong connections with other companies. On that note, Ryan has been a great help. His approachable nature allows him to communicate smoothly with anyone. He and Mr. Foster have a long history and are on good terms. Hearing this, Andrew's eyes widened in disbelief. Throughout my life, I had accumulated a wealth of knowledge and skills, which I now used in a role similar to that of a secretary. I advised on management decisions, offered solutions to internal company issues, and supported the business in any way I could. After explaining that, I awkwardly added a few more words. "Well, my father and I can't actually cancel the deal on a whim. Sometimes, though, you have to say something drastic to make your anger clear." Unlike Andrew, who had only graduated junior high school, I had completed a prestigious university at the top of my class. I used the knowledge I gained there to support the employees and operations of our company. Still, I chose not to bring up the past, as it wasn't something Andrew needed to hear. My father had also graduated from a respectable university with excellent marks. Perhaps to avoid pressuring Andrew as the grandson of such an accomplished family, my father, too, had chosen to remain silent. Sensing a pause in the conversation, Mr. Foster cautiously spoke. So, did one of my employees offend your son in some way? His humility seemed unbecoming of a company president, but given our history, it was understandable. Pretending not to mind, I continued speaking. Well, something quite serious happened. You see. Over the next 10 minutes, Andrew and I took turns explaining the situation. This is unbelievable. This isn't just a business problem. Using someone's family to make threats, that's completely unacceptable as a human being. Mr. Foster paled, his face filled with shame. I'm deeply sorry for the serious misconduct of one of my employees. I'll call in here immediately to get to the bottom of this. He bowed deeply, apologizing sincerely. After a firm apology, he promised to summon Daniel. At that moment, Mr. Foster regained his composure, embodying the dignity expected of a company president. A few minutes later, Daniel, who had been summoned, entered with a puzzled look on his face. He greeted Mr. Foster properly and introduced himself politely to my father and me. However, the moment his eyes landed on Andrew, his expression twisted in confusion and suspicion. It was clear he couldn't understand why Andrew was even there. Seeing this, Mr. Foster immediately scolded him. Hey, that's rude. Say hello to Andrew as well. Daniel then looked back and forth between Andrew and Mr. Foster with a bewildered expression, as if to say, "What?" After a few seconds of hesitation, he carefully chose his words and spoke to Mr. Foster. Pardon me, Mr. Foster, but perhaps you're mistaking this man for someone else? He's not the kind of person who belongs in a place like this. Hearing this, Mr. Foster's face sank with visible disappointment. And who gave you the authority to decide that? Whether or not he belongs here is for me to determine, don't you think? That may be true, but I assumed you didn't know who this man really is. I may not know every detail, but I have more than enough reason for him to be here. Daniel's expression grew even more puzzled at Mr. Foster's words. For now, sit down on the sofa. I understand there's some history between you and Andrew, but I don't know the finer details yet. As instructed, Daniel sat down on the sofa, seemingly thinking that Andrew had said something unnecessary. Glaring fiercely at Andrew, he silently opened his mouth. It looked like he was trying to say something through lip movements. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but he probably wanted to tell Andrew something like, "Don't say anything more ridiculous." Mr. Foster, there's really no reason to discuss this here. I don't know what you're worried about, but it's nothing that warrants your concern. The moment Daniel said that, the atmosphere surrounding Mr. Foster shifted. The cold air surrounding Mr. Foster felt sharp and unyielding, entirely unlike his earlier demeanor. How many times must I say this? It's not for you to decide. There won't be a third warning. Watch your tongue if you know what's good for you. I'm sorry. Daniel's face went pale, his body visibly trembling. Even Andrew seemed intimidated, his shoulders trembling slightly. I've heard enough to know there was some trouble on the way to work this morning. I was told that you told Andrew not to come to work because he's a junior high school graduate. Is that accurate? That's completely wrong. I only said it out of kindness. It sounds like I had bad intentions, but I didn't. Oh? Out of kindness, you say? So, threatening to spread bad rumors about his family, that was also an act of kindness? Mr. Foster's tone was calm, almost gentle, but the coldness in his demeanor remained chilling. The softness of his voice contrasted with the sharpness in his eyes, making him all the more intimidating. Daniel, shaking uncontrollably, tried desperately to defend himself. That's nonsense. I didn't say anything like that. And honestly, if someone skips the entrance ceremony just because of a little strong advice, that's on them. He's an irresponsible new hire. I'm sure he's lying. It was at that moment that I first thought about the time. When I looked at the watch on my wrist, I realized that the entrance ceremony was already over. With everything that had happened, I had forgotten, but Andrew was supposed to be attending that ceremony. Thinking about how he should have been there, feeling proud and happy, made me a little sad. Carrying that feeling, I turned to Daniel and began to speak. I made sure to stay calm and composed, avoiding any emotional outbursts. I'd appreciate it if you refrained from insulting my son. If we're talking about dishonesty, someone who resorts to cowardly tactics like what you've done seems far more likely to be lying. Even my father could no longer remain silent. His voice, heavy and commanding, cut through the tension. Speaking ill of others doesn't elevate you. If anything, it only diminishes your own worth. You should remember that. Daniel flinched visibly, as if struck by the words, and fell silent. Still, perhaps thinking that saying nothing wouldn't change the situation, he began to speak in a low, hesitant voice. I didn't put up any paper. That's ridiculous. I'd never do something so foolish. In denying it, Daniel unknowingly dug himself into a deeper hole. Mr. Foster's voice turned ice cold as he delivered his next words. I never mentioned anything about a paper. Why would you think that? That's because, well, I just assumed if it's harassment, then maybe something like a note would be involved. As he stubbornly tried to make excuses over and over, Mr. Foster silenced him with a sharp reprimand. The intensity of his anger was unimaginable compared to the timid demeanor he had when we first met. Enough already. Admit to what you've done. Daniel's face crumbled, and at last, he broke down, his voice shaking. I'm sorry. It was all my fault. Please forgive me. Daniel, now on the verge of tears, bit his lip as he glanced at us. But there were still things he needed to explain. Why did you do something like this? When Mr. Foster asked, Daniel began to speak with a serious expression. Because he's a junior high school graduate. If someone with a low academic background works here, it disrupts the order of our company. They won't perform well, and nothing good can come from it. Daniel spoke as though expecting Mr. Foster's agreement. His previously weak voice grew stronger, as if he had found confidence in his reasoning. I admit my methods were immature. I should have explained things to him properly, so he could understand his shortcomings. But I don't think what I was trying to achieve was wrong. It was clear that Daniel's mindset was fundamentally flawed. Hearing his explanation, Mr. Foster pressed his hand to his temple, as though fighting off a headache. So you're saying that people with low educational backgrounds, like Andrew, don't belong here? That your actions may have been wrong, but driving him away was correct? And that you still don't want him working here? Exactly, Mr. Foster. I'm glad you understand what I mean. Daniel's face brightened, as though he had finally found someone who agreed with him. He failed to notice the deep disappointment in Mr. Foster's gaze. With a long sigh, Mr. Foster finally responded. I don't understand why you look down so much on those with lower education. There are all kinds of people in the world. Deciding someone's worth without even getting to know them is wrong, don't you think? I don't need to know them to understand. People with low education never fit into society. It's just obvious. Hearing Daniel's words, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of curiosity. What on earth had he seen throughout his life? Perhaps he had witnessed countless terrible actions by people with little education. As it turned out, I was right. Near my house, there's a rundown high school. I've seen it all, kids shouting at all hours, causing trouble, and disturbing everyone. I was sick of it every single day. I have a lot on my mind, but I understand that he's been troubled by people from that high school throughout his life. I sympathize with him, But I can't stand the thought of Andrew being seen as the same. I understand where you're coming from, Daniel, but don't impose your personal views on our grandson. Isn't that right, Mr. Foster? Indeed, for this, you'll face a small punishment. What? It's unfortunate, but this is your first offense. You'll be punished for sending a new employee home on your own. Additionally, you must apologize to Andrew for judging him based on his education. That's completely unacceptable. That said, I can understand some of the frustration you felt. After a moment of thought, Mr. Foster announced that Daniel's punishment was cleaning the company's restrooms for 1 month. Daniel looked dissatisfied, but he reluctantly accepted. He also apologized to Andrew for the note and his inappropriate threats regarding his family. With Daniel's punishment settled, my father took the opportunity to discuss our company's future business relationship with Mr. Foster. Amidst the busyness of work, opportunities to step into another company are limited. He likely thought to take care of anything that needed to be done while he was there. While my grandson's well-being is important, we also have a responsibility to the employees who rely on us. I simply moved up a previously planned discussion. I've also managed to negotiate slightly better terms for our deal moving forward. As both a president and a person, there still seems to be much I can learn from my father. I've been assisting him for many years, but during this incident, I nearly lost my composure at times, making me realize how far I still have to go. After this, Andrew officially began working at the company the next day, alongside Daniel. Andrew has been working hard to earn his recognition. In the product development department, where they design model prototypes and brainstorm ideas for new products, he seems to be giving it his all, sacrificing sleep to keep up the effort. He told me that he's inspired every day and that it's so much more fulfilling than when he was just an ordinary company employee. Whenever Andrew shares updates about his work with Samantha and me, his face is always bright and full of energy. Seeing him, I realized how much achieving a dream and landing one's ideal job can truly change a person. However, that initial happiness didn't last long. Before long, Andrew was relegated to menial tasks. Daniel, isn't there anything I can help with? I'll do anything. I already told you, you're in the way. Stop talking to me. There's nothing you're capable of handling. Andrew pleaded with Daniel to let him contribute more. But Daniel, still holding on to his prejudice, refused to give him any real responsibilities. He must still think that people with little education are of no use. I find that to be utterly foolish. It seems Daniel's way of thinking wasn't accepted by those around him, as his colleagues began to criticize his actions. Poor Andrew. He's working so hard, yet Daniel says he's incapable. Judging someone based on their education alone is cruel. Why can't Daniel see what's right in front of him? Academic background doesn't determine a person's true worth. We can all see that Andrew is a good, hardworking man. The problem is that Daniel isn't really looking at him. He's filtering everything through his own biases. According to Andrew's colleagues, the department had never employed someone with a junior high or high school diploma before. Still, they all expressed the same opinion. Daniel was never the type to harass others. I can't believe he's behaving like this. It seemed that Daniel was kind and accommodating toward people with backgrounds similar to his own. However, this incident made him realize just how distorted his values had become, and the shock of it was clear. Isn't my way of thinking normal? Up until now, everyone I spoke to agreed with me. Surrounded by people who shared similar beliefs for most of his life, Daniel hadn't had a reason to question his worldview. This time, though, something shifted in him. Perhaps it was the first time he felt the need to reflect on his own actions. He voluntarily requested a demotion and became a regular employee. Not only that, but he also decided to transfer to another department. He decided, after discussing with the HR team, to work in an area where employees with lower academic backgrounds were more prevalent. He wanted to challenge his own values and look at the world from a different perspective. His decision struck me as extreme, but I respected his determination not to go easy on himself. From what I later heard, adjusting to this new environment wasn't easy for him. The work was unfamiliar, and he often had to rely on the kindness of senior colleagues. Still, Andrew later told me that Daniel had been working hard, reflecting on his mistakes every day, and coming to terms with his previously flawed mindset. A year passed. Today is the day of the anniversary party for the company where Andrew works. As expected of a large corporation, the event is being held in a spacious hall rented out at a hotel. My father and I were also invited, and it was there that we saw Daniel again for the first time in a long while. He had changed so much that he was unrecognizable compared to a year ago. When Daniel and Andrew crossed paths, it was also their first meeting in a long time. After exchanging updates about their lives, Daniel suddenly bowed deeply. "I'm truly sorry for what I did back then. My way of thinking was wrong. Please forgive me." Daniel shared how tough the past year had been for him. He admitted that he often relied on senior colleagues for help and even struggled with injuries while adjusting to the new work environment. When his prejudice against others' academic backgrounds was revealed, some colleagues ridiculed him. On top of that, there was also a time when he angered the son of an executive, which caused quite a stir. Apparently, he was even threatened that harm would come to his family. After experiencing the same kind of exclusion, I finally understood how Andrew must have felt. I did something truly awful, and I'm ashamed of myself. But it was clear that Daniel had grown tremendously as a person through those hardships. For both Andrew and Daniel, the events of a year ago had been anything but pleasant. However, it was clear that those experiences were necessary for their growth. Later that evening, my father and I had a chance to speak with Mr. Foster as well. "You've grown stronger. You're a much more capable president than you were a year ago. It's all thanks to Ryan when I was just starting out. I'll never forget the support you gave me back then." "Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. Any stories about my son's achievements are always of interest to me." I told my father about the time when Mr. Foster was just an ordinary employee. It feels like a distant memory now, but back then, I taught him many of the basic social norms he didn't yet understand. "Interesting. Andrew has grown into a responsible, family-oriented young man. And you, Ryan, have become someone who values the connections you make. Come on, you're embarrassing me. Truly, I owe so much to Ryan. I was just a privileged boy, sheltered by my parents. When I entered the real world, I didn't know a thing. If I hadn't met Ryan at that small bar and received his guidance, I wouldn't be where I am today. At the time, I thought he was an unreliable man. But that same person is now the president of a company that has become one of our business partners. Not only that, it's also the company where my son, Andrew, works. It's funny how life brings people together in unexpected ways." After enjoying myself at the party, I returned home and spent time talking with my family about various things. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined it, but Andrew has grown into someone I can truly rely on. He's learned to lean on others and no longer tries to carry everything on his own. Now, Andrew is planning to gift us a trip as a token of his gratitude. "Dad, Mom, and Grandpa, let's go on a trip soon. I managed to get tickets for a nice hotel and some leisure facilities. Please keep your schedules open. You really are such a thoughtful young man. But for now, you should focus on settling into your job." That's right. As your parents, we just did what any parent would. A year has passed. It's time I did something to give back. Andrew truly is a kind and thoughtful person. He's responsible and family-oriented. On top of that, he has a genuine compassion for anyone who is struggling. Well, since Andrew went through the effort of getting these tickets, I'll make sure to clear my schedule. You're a busy company president. Can you make it work? I'll do my best. This is a special gift from my grandson, after all. Life will surely bring more challenges in the future. But I believe that Andrew, with the support of those around him, will be able to overcome them. After all, that's what it means to live. We help one another, support each other, and keep moving forward. Even Daniel managed to grow and overcome his flaws, thanks to the help of Mr. Foster and the senior employees at his new workplace. No matter how difficult the challenges ahead may seem, as long as we don't give up and continue fighting, I believe we can always make it through.